So okay guys, today I'm going to be showing you how I designed and prototyped this touch activated switch using nothing more than a couple of quarters, a 555 timer, a few resistors, and a MOSFET. Now with that said, I explained how MOSFETs work pretty much in my TV Be Gone video, which was my last project that I have made. So if you're wondering how that works, I'm not going to be covering it fully in this video, but just think of it like an electronic switch. You can trigger the output on and off with it, and that's what we're going to be using in conjunction with our 555 timer to act as our touch activated switch. Now the 555 timer itself is pretty much used for generating pulses and timing and such. However, for our particular purposes, we're going to be using the trigger pins and the threshold pin on the 555 timer itself to act as touch sensing pins. Now normally by default these touch sensing pins will be extremely sensitive, so we have to use a couple of 10 ohm resistors in order to prevent any kind of accidental power on or off of this circuit. Anyway, if you're a beginner when it comes to electronics, as always, I suggest you to use socketed parts when it comes to ICs, so be sure to get a socketed version of a 555 timer. I designed the 3D printed case with that part in mind, so it will fit in there, so don't worry about adding extra height, just to fit in a socket. Now, a great thing about a socketed 555 timer is if you mess up, you can just take out the IC, plop in a new one, fix whatever you messed up, and you shouldn't have to break out any desoldering irons or anything like that in order to do so. But yeah, with that said, the diagram's up on screen, so let's quickly go over it. Now, the IC itself needs some power. A 555 timer can take around 16 volts if I recall correctly. However, with my particular usage and when I plan to use this device for, it's a 12 volt activated switch, and 12 volts will work fine for this purpose. So I'm going to be powering the 555 timer itself with 12 volts. And to do that, I made a positive rail and a negative rail, and those two rails get plugged into our power source at the end of the project. But for the time being, I left it unpowered and I begin wiring up the 555 timer. You want to hook in pin 1, which if I remember correctly is our ground pin, and you want to hook in the VCC pin to our power rails. And speaking of power, we want to apply power to pin 4 of our 555 timer. The pin 4 is our reset pin, and we want that on by default. So we basically set it to high, and from that point on we can hook in a couple of wires from our trigger pin and our threshold pin and leave those just hanging out. You want to have enough wire to connect those to the front case of the lid itself, which will hold our quarters. These wires will be our touch sensing pins. From this point, we want to add 2 more wires and hang them out. This will be our ground wire and our positive wire. These will correspond with the touch sensing pins themselves in order to make them a little bit more sensitive. And speaking of sensitivity, with the 555 timer and just using the wires by default, you may notice that the trigger will be triggered, just by any amount of electrostatic in the air. That's not really good. We want this only to trigger when we touch it, which is why we're going to add 2 10 ohm resistors. I'll show you guys where those get added in the video, but overall these resistors are a necessary precaution to prevent the circuit from accidentally turning on. Now you can feel free to play with the resistor values here if you wish. As long as you're modifying only the 10 ohm resistors, you should be good to go. But like I said, if your circuit you find out is turning itself on or off, just mysteriously or with no reason, it's because your resistor value isn't high enough. But yeah, speaking of resistors, we're not quite done. We want to attach a 1K resistor from the output pin on the 555 timer to the gate of our MOSFET. Now you can add a 10K resistor to ground from the gate of our MOSFET if you so desire. I've, however, found it to be pretty much unnecessary in my needs, so I just left it out of my particular circuit. But if you find your circuit acting kind of funny, especially with the MOSFET side of things, add a 10K from the gate to ground and that should fix it. Overall, from that point, we just hook up our power to the other 2 points on the MOSFET, basically, and we're done. You could follow the diagram. I'm not going to really go about explaining how the MOSFET works again, like I said, because I explained it before pretty well in the TV Be Gone video. But yeah, if you built everything correctly, you should get something that's pretty much the size of maybe the width of your phone. Now this circuit board, if you got the same perf board that I used and you ordered it down below from the description, should fit exactly within the 3D printed case. You will notice the two standoffs do not align with the holes on the perf board itself. This was a bit of a design flaw, but actually it's a design win in my opinion, because if you got any wires you need to stuff under later, that will easily allow you to have some space to do so without touching anything else on your circuit. Also, if you're worried about short circuits or anything of the nature when it comes to this circuit, you can add a fuse in between the power rails to prevent any kind of damage. I didn't really need to do that because I'm hooking this right up into my solar charge controller, which comes with a short circuit protection built in as well as a fuse. But yeah, you just stick it in there and stick your wires under if you need to, and if you got enough room and you don't really need the extra standoffs for space, you can just cut them off, hot glue the rest of it in there, and pretty much hook the rest of the wires up to the quarters, then glue the quarters in, and from there you can actually just screw on your lid. If you're having some issue with soldering to quarters, I know it's a bit hard and you don't really have to solder these on, you really don't. You could probably just use some aluminum tape to accomplish the same task. However, I went for the effort of soldering mine on. You just have to sand the quarters a bit or apply a little bit extra heat to them in order to get it to stick fairly well. Now when it came to prototyping and designing the case, this part's going to be a little off topic. At this point you're probably done building the thing, so just go down below and print the case out. But if you're curious as to how I went about making it, all I really did was I 3D scanned the board. I put the perf board in my paper scanner, scanned it, and I basically photoshopped around it, built a case up from scratch like that. And then I used a caliper to determine the height, although you can easily measure height with a paper scanner as well. I just didn't want to do that because I got a caliper now, and it made this whole project a lot more easier overall. Now if you guys need any kind of custom lids or you decide you want to use something else that's metal for the contacts instead of quarters, let me know. Maybe I have a similar object around that's available and I can design a lid for you, but I can't guarantee that. However, if it intrigues me enough and it seems simple enough, I may make a lid for you if you wish not to use quarters. But yeah, before I go, I do want to apologize for the lack of a video when it came to soldering and putting this thing together. My SD card and my camera got corrupted, and unfortunately by the time I realized this, I've already built this thing and I built one before it, all without the video, so I didn't feel like making a third one or taking this one apart again. So I hope you guys can forgive me there. However, if I do work on this again in the future to make some more improvements to it, perhaps we can take it apart again and, well, have a closer look at it overall. But like I said, I'm going to leave today's video off here now. DTPK signing off. Peace. So okay, now that the Tor browser is opened, I'm just going to paste in that onion URL and hit enter. After I did that, I photoshopped around a bit, got a design I think would feel good in my hand.